We've talked about air-driven filters, we've talked about hang-on backs. We're back with my terrible art, and we're going to go over canister filters. How does placement of the inlet and outlet of your canister filter affect flow within your tank? Hello everyone, this is Bentley, and today we're back for another terrible art lesson. Bob Ross, I am not. But what I can do is explain some basics about how, when we place with our canister filters, the inlet, represented in green, and the outlet, represented in red, within our tank, across a number of different styles of inlets and outlets, and how that's going to affect flow within our tank. So we're going to start really simple. This is kind of similar to what a lot of people might end up doing, where you have both the inlet in green and the outlet in red on the same side of the tank. And these can be angled in a lot of different ways, but usually when we do this, we're kind of having water pushed this way, whether it's at an angle or direct, and very rarely we're having it come straight at us, but you could, right? And in that case, when it's coming straight at you, it's very similar to what we saw in the hang-on back lesson because they're so close to each other. The only difference is usually the output of a canister filter is a much narrower stream of more powerful water. So it's a much heavier flow in this region. I'm not going to fully map that one out. Watch the hang-on back. If you haven't seen that, that'll be up in the corner right now. That'll give you an idea for this placement and help you kind of understand why it's not very optimal for a canister filter. But let's say we've got it set up right, and we're pushing more at an angle, okay, or directly across the tank. So in this case, with our side view, right, what we're going to see is that water is going to come back, it's going to shoot out that way, and it's going to slowly loop like this, right? And you're going to have flow all throughout these areas, slowly but surely, but the concentrated loop is going to go kind of out, like let's assume that our box is here, it's going to go out, deflect off of the glass, and start sweeping down and around, right? That actually gives us, assuming there aren't any physical blockers in place, a lot of room through here to just generally move detritus around, mulm, things like that. This can be really good at a very basic level for collecting detritus. However, because the water is going all the way across the tank and deflecting to come back down, and we'll show that over here, right? We're coming out here. Here's our primary flow. And it's going to loop out, deflect off this glass here, start coming down. And yeah, you're going to have some little flows like this, and some weaker flows kind of like this. You might have some that curtails off through here a little bit. And you'll have weaker flow that slowly comes this way. But the primary flow is going to be coming down this way, deflecting and coming back across, although kind of at an angle, so you might miss the very back of the tank. You'll have minimal flow on the opposite side of the intake down low, okay? So not here, but over here in the back of the tank is where you could get some more minimal flow. Now through the rest of this, it's going to be pretty good. And that's simple, but this is not the common output side. And the reason why this is really simple, because we have things we can more dynamically move than we can with like a hang-on back, it is much more advantageous for us to split them, because now we're using the force of that flow to our advantage rather than trying to mimic a hang-on back with a canister filter. And the only example where I would say this is a little bit different is if we were hanging things from the side of the tank. Let me quickly draw that and explain that situation. Again, forgive the art, but usually what you're going to see is the outlet is going to be toward the front of the tank and the inlet is toward the back. And when they're on the side like this, what you get is you get stronger flow because we're using a canister filter, especially up this way. It's going to shoot across the tank just like it did before, right? So we're going to have this good flow that comes like this and comes down primarily through here. Deflects through. Yeah, you're going to have some taper off through here and through this way. But what really happens, and this is where it's more interesting, is when we think about this more in a 3D way, we've got that flow coming this way, right? It's coming from the other side of the tank toward us. Let's think about it like this. This is the opposite side of the tank. So like we're looking through this side. And what happens is a majority of the flow hits the the glass here and deflects down, right? But as a part of this deflection, you're going to have a lot of this, right? Where it's going to create this kind of vortex-like effect, like think boomeranging almost, where you're going to have a lot of flow against this sidewall and it's going to come and slowly push back this way. Where your flow becomes a little more minimal, if the only inlet is down low, skimmer type inlets change this, is you're going to have not so much flow kind of in the back section here and up top toward the inlet. So where the outlet is, lots of flow, but toward the inlet up top, a lot less movement of your water. Still quite a bit though, just because of the nature of how much force canister filters tend to move water with. This can be really advantageous, and you'll see this very commonly in a lot of aquascapes. And part of the reason why is simple. Let's say you have something here, like an island or something like that, that is able to normally obscure flow. Well, because you have your inlets and outlets split, you can get flow to wrap around those pieces of hardscape or dense planting. We actually see that in my tank fallen forest, right? They're split around, there's pieces of wood, but the flow helps push detritus around some of those areas of blockage and move it toward the filter intakes. This can be extremely effective when you're going for some of your like higher aquascape things where you have larger structures of hardscape because of the natural dynamic of the water flow coming across here and pushing around before it starts returning back this way in the tank. That's going to help move a lot of our detritus around and generally make sure that there is reasonable flow through almost every area of the aquarium itself. This is when we do things on the same side. What happens when we split the sides and we put them across from each other off of the back of the tank? Let's draw that up and talk about that difference. So here we are. From the side again, it's going to look kind of similar, but from our front view of our aquarium, you can see we've split the inlet and outlet, again represented green inlet, red outlet. What happens here with a single outlet depends on how we angle things. But basically put, because we have that strong flow, even if we push it directly front facing toward the glass, in this example, what you're going to see is from front to back, you're again going to have this really nice strong flow that hits the front glass, deflects, and starts moving across the aquarium. And sure, you're going to get a little turbulence that sits up here for a little bit, and it'll kind of backtrack some, but what you're going to not see is a ton of flow in this back section here. This will be more still, and that can be a very positive thing depending on the species you're keeping. This might be good for certain species that need a resting place as opposed to having it come across the tank or at an angle. Now from this side, what we're going to see is that water comes at us, and similar to what we saw before, that kind of like boomerang action, right? Where it's going to hit the front glass, deflect, and start moving this way. You're going to have your kind of strongest flows are going to hit this way, bounce around, they'll swirl a bit here, but you're also going to have some stuff that as it hits the glass is going to deflect more this way and in some of these higher portions of the tank as they come back toward the inlet. Again, against the back glass here is where you're going to have a lot more minimal water movement. You'll have some inherent that comes because of the suction of your inlet here, but especially as you get up in this region, toward the top where the suction's not primarily pulling from, and completely across the way from the primary flow and that kind of kinetic force that comes out of that outlet is where you're going to have the least water movement. You're still going to have water movement, and this is a good secondary way to do this so that you get water flow throughout the whole tank. Now the only difference is, like, let's say we were pushing water at an angle, coming across basically from the back of the tank to this front corner, right? So back to front corner. The primary difference here is that that water flow isn't going to deflect down this way early. So it's going to look more like this. So if we look at the front of the tank, what you're going to see is if you're firing it at an angle, the majority of your flow is going to come this way, then deflect off this front corner and start to come downward and back. That's a little hard to display here, but it's a similar movement. The only difference is a majority of that movement is going to happen over in this portion of the tank. And you're going to see a lot less. You'll see some minor flow here, right, as some stuff will trickle off this way and this way. But you're really not going to see much movement down in this area. So this, not necessarily an optimal setup, okay? Because it leaves a larger portion of the tank with fairly minimal flow, and it's toward the front of your tank, which can be kind of unsightly depending on how you want to keep your tank. Now, if you want a larger region of minimal flow so that you have a large area to rest, or maybe you keep something like guppies or platies that have larger fins and need a little bit more area to relax, this is where this actually can be good. I do something kind of similar in my guppy mansion where I have, instead of an intake down low, I have a skimmer box, right? An overflow box. And my inlets are firing across the tank up top. And it leaves this region down here to have very minimal flow. And that can be great in combination with plants for protecting young fry. However, if you're looking for good flow kind of all around, this is not necessarily an optimal setup. Let's start talking about the versions of these setups that have 2 outlets instead of 1. This is going to be like your FX series, your Awaze Biomasters have this option. A lot of your bigger canisters tend to have this where they have a split outlet if it comes with their own piping. So let's demonstrate how that changes this dynamic. So here we are across the tank again with only the single outlet down low, but we've got a split. So what's going to happen is we've got inherently some water flow coming directly at us from the back, and that's going to tilt down this way like we demonstrated earlier, right? But then we've also got water flow going this way. So you end up with kind of the best of both worlds, because you have a lot of water flow that's going directly to your glass, deflecting down and helping to hit these lower areas back here. But you also have water that's coming up high so that you don't have still zones up here that's coming across the tank before it starts to deflect and wrap around. Now this does still leave a minor area of lower flow down in this side angle, because most of these are split like this, so usually you're kind of angling it like this, right? So it's not perfectly flat against the back glass, but it's more flow than would be just the single outlet that's coming straight out. So what this does is it creates 2 fairly intense jets of water that will move a lot of things. And where this can be exceptionally good again is when you have some kind of blockage here in the center of the tank. This will split the flow around that and help move detritus and general water flow, which also is going to give you good oxygenation overall around the tank before it starts making its way over here to our intake. This can be extremely good, especially if you're planning to have a tank that is more oriented toward high oxygenation and you're using only the outlet of the filter itself to cause that gas exchange, that turbulence at the top of your water. This just causes a lot of turbulence at the top of the water. It can be extremely good for a number of species, great for like rainbow fish as an example, or any of your fish that like a little extra flow. Depending on how powerful the filter is, it could provide too much top water movement for certain species, so certain guppies might not do well unless there's large areas or it's a very large tank overall that give them spaces to rest. Overall, this is a fairly optimal setup. Before we start talking about crazier intakes, like the split low and high skimmer or just the skimmer, or before we start looking into something like a spray bar for our outlet. So let's look at this scenario a little differently. Let's say we have, whether it's the single outlet or the split outlet, it kind of doesn't matter, but we have a skimmer portion up top. right? So we've got our inlet here, and then we've got the skimmer kind of box here as the other part of our inlet, right? The difference here is very similar whether you have the split outlet or the singular outlet, in that you've got two sections of suction that are occurring. So water can come in both from down low and up at the very top. Now the difference here is usually this. Often when we have this sort of setup to where you're also forcing water flow to come basically back up high as a part of your inlet, what this is doing is it's going to add more surface agitation. Not necessarily stronger, just more surface movement. And this can help, unless the canister is dialed down really low, and in certain aquascapes that's the case, this can help again with that gas exchange up at the top of your water, which can produce more and more oxygen for your fish colony. Overflow boxes do a similar thing, so you're coming through a weir right up here, and you might even have a low intake here instead. Similar concept, where it allows the flow to come in and move around from multiple different directions. This is really good for ensuring there's no basically completely still areas of water movement within your tank. It's fairly unlikely to have perfectly still water in any aquarium, but this design kind of optimizes, or maybe makes more uniform flow throughout the entirety of the tank, except at the very top water, right? Because we've got these strong jets, we've got intake. Those are going to move a lot of water nearest to both the inlet and the outlets. So you'll have some areas with fairly high turbulence. Again, great for oxygenation and gas exchange, but might be tough for certain fish. Don't go putting your super large finned grass guppies or, big veil-tailed bettas in something that's this design. It's probably going to be too much flow and might tire them out and cause them to live shorter lives. But if you're dealing with a lot of like your river fish, angelfish, rainbow fish, these things that like a little bit more flow, this is fantastic because it keeps plenty of movement throughout the entire aquarium, which also helps distribute things like your fertilizers, your oxygen. If you're using CO2 gas, this is really good for distributing things around. So if you've got plants all over the place and you're worried on maybe stuff's not getting down to some of my lower plants because of the way that the flow is designed, these split sets of flow out of canister filters can help optimize that water movement and make sure that things are getting kind of everywhere uniformly in the tank, rather than maybe being focused in one area like some of the other versions that we've explored previously. Where this goes real crazy is if we start introducing things like a spray bar. Let me do some erasing here, and we'll mock up the differences with a spray bar. And then we'll also talk about a couple niche cases that are really suboptimal. I'm cheating a little bit here. I want to show two different arrangements of a spray bar without having to redraw this a couple times for you. So the first one is spray bar aligned against the back of your glass, pointing toward the front. That's going to be here, okay? Let's talk over here. The big thing about a spray bar is going to disperse the overall oomph of your canister filter, right? Because if you think about those outlets, they put a fairly powerful jet of water out, which can be amazing depending on what you're trying to do. But in this case, you have tons of little holes throughout here, right? Let's say each of these slashes is a hole. And what it does is it fires a much more narrow stream of water so that you have water coming out all across this. And usually you have this toward the top of your tank. I would never put a spray bar down low. Use a spray bar up top. It helps give you that surface agitation, which can be really important for our fish, but also this disperses the water so that we've got this gentler but very wide blade of water coming out, hitting the front glass, so that almost everywhere is kind of getting this action, right? It's coming front, it's ricocheting down, and it's slowly making its way over toward your inlets. And we're going to assume we don't have a skimmer in this case, but if you did, you would still have some deflection of water that stays up top all the way across the tank from each of these outlets and makes its way to the skimmer portion as well. From the side, what that looks like is, again, you have this kind of quiet area here, right? But otherwise, you've got across almost the entirety of the tank, or as long as that spray bar is, you have this nice motion of water that's going from the back to the front, ricocheting down, wrapping around, and coming over toward the intake. So where you're going to have some minimal flow in this style is here. I realize I'm going to have to draw this again anyway. And then all the way along the back, right? So you're going to have this kind of narrow band along the back, like this, or at the whole back of the glass, where there's a little less flow because the raw output of water from a spray bar is dispersed. It's lower. It's more gentle. This is incredibly good if you want to have very uniform flow across the entire tank, or maybe you like a kind of river system style flow, but you want it to be not like truly river system powerful. Let's talk about it when it's done the other way. First, we're going to talk about the spray bar being on the same side as the inlet. So this would be our side glass, right? We have this with a spray bar up top, and the water flow is coming out this way, right? So we've got it going across the entire side of the tank. But what's happening is it's creating this huge wide blade, kind of similar to our hang-on back. It's deflecting down, coming back. And again, if we had the skimmer section, you'd have some that would ricochet and still come up back up this way. But you're going to have a lot of stuff. The most powerful flow is kind of like this. Then you'll have some tailing off here. And some of this through here is going to more tightly move back in this direction. You're going to have some very light flow come up this way. But in general, what you're going to see is this, again, very similar to our hang-on back on the side. The difference being it's, rather than a big blade, it's lots of little jets of water. Here, where we're going to see our primary difference. So right here, the way this is designed, this is our low flow zone, right? This area here. But for the most part, everything out here is going to have really good flow. Maybe even better than a hang-on back. It depends on how powerful the motor powering the canister is. But very similar to a hang-on back in this design. Similarly, right, because this is pushing out, bouncing back, and wrapping around, you have this, where again, like almost this whole zone against this wall of glass here, where they're both sitting, is going to be kind of lower flow. Not a ton, but lower flow. Where this changes is if they're on opposite sides. So here's our spray bar on the opposite side and our intake. This side is going to look pretty similar. It's hard to really show that from a side view without like some real crazy nonsense, right? But at least with my art skills, we'll put it that way. But this is where it changes big time. Because we're getting this strong jet of water that comes out this way, right? All the way across the tank, this whole area becomes very minimal flow. Similar to if we put the jets across and we're pushing across, the only difference is because we have an even thinner blade of water that's across the whole top of the tank, we're really limiting excess flow, movement, etc. through this zone and getting very, very, very minimal on this far side. So most of what we're doing is we're pushing water across, and if we have a skimmer, it's almost going straight in, and then some of it's going to ricochet off our glass here, come down, and head back toward the intake. This is going to create a massive area of a low flow zone, which you might want in certain niche scenarios. But I would say this is one of the worst possible ways to set up a canister filter with a spray bar. And let's talk about some of the other not great ways to set up a canister filter when it comes to just the standard jet outlets really quickly. So I'm not going to fully diagram this out, but let's say you have top with a top skimmer, right? It's going to be similar to this, whether it's a jet or a spray bar, where almost all your flow is going to stay top. You're going to have really minimal flow down low. Very little flow is coming this way. It's going to kind of almost trickle up outside of what ricochets around here if they're across from each other. If they're on the same side, it's even worse because you're really going to have very limited amounts of flow. And that would be like, let's say you have a skimmer here and a jet coming out this way straight at us, right? It's just all your flow's here and almost nothing's going to happen over here. The other super bad version of this is if the intake is low and you had your jet down low too. That looks terrible. Right? So what happens is all your outflow is this way, and whether it's coming across the tank or whether it's shooting out against the glass and wrapping around, it keeps everything down low and really minimizes movement up here. You would see the same over this way. And there's maybe a small case where this would matter, but because you're not causing surface agitation at all, you're actually really limiting your oxygenation inside your tank. So this would almost require you to either have an extremely heavily planted tank that is really, really good at photosynthesizing, maybe it's got light CO2, or to have an air stone in order to add supplemental air, because you're really not causing very much surface agitation here. Where this could be useful is if you needed stronger flow for something like Plecostomus, and you really wanted to give them that low river flow, and then use probably only like some air stones or a sponge filter to make sure that the rest of the water column is oxygenated. But otherwise, I would avoid at all costs in a canister having your outflow low and your intake low, because it's just not going to give you very much flow through this, like 2/3 of the tank up here. And that can be very dangerous when it comes to low oxygenation issues, or in general, just kind of like not moving a ton of water in the grand scheme of things. So if you're trying to disperse like fertilizers, or maybe you're worried about some other chemical in the way, water chemistry oriented thing, not the best flow patterns. So just kind of avoid those. Overall, what's the big thing? Because we can split the outlet and inlet of a canister flow, we get to create this, instead of circular or more obvious designs, we get to create this cool arching movement of water, right? Where it goes from the top down low all the way across the tank. And there's multiple ways that we can do this, but in general, that's the big advantage to the way that a split inlet and outlet filtration system provides you when it comes to movement. Now, I know I didn't cover like weirs, but basically, and that's an overflow box is a weir where you've got the grating and stuff. It's the same as kind of having the skimmer outlet. We don't need to go super complex with that. Just think of it like a bigger version of the skimmer outlet on a you know, like whether you got the metal ones or the glass ones, whatever, right? It's just a bigger version of that. Where this really matters is that you can, with your canister filter, get a similar, very mimicked to hang-on back flow pattern. Or by splitting the inlet and outlet and adjusting a few things, you can create much more dynamic water movement throughout your tank, which will, one, help you move detritus around and get it into that filter, giving that good mechanical filtration. And two, make sure that any fertilizers, oxygenation, whatever you're trying to get in your water, maybe you're doing like really fine foods or some other kind of thing that you're trying to get throughout the entire water column, this is one of the best ways to do that, which is the canister filter. And the same can be said for a sump. Sumps are basically just like enormous canister filters. It's all about just how you plumb them in that case. In most cases, those are going to use an overflow box. So that's the basics. There's a million different ways you can do this because there's all sorts of really fancy outlets that you can do with canister filters. You know, there's the lily pipe. There's the circular pipe that breaks the water out like this and really reduces flow. There's the ones that are designed to jet upward. There's way more than I can cover without doing this for like 4.5 hours. So just apply these basics and understand that there's ways to manipulate these things, and this canister filter mentality gives you the most diversity in how you can adjust the flow within your tank and how water moves throughout the water column from the outlet to the inlet within your system. That's the big benefit when it comes to thinking about filter placement and those kind of things in a canister filter is you have much more dynamic options in a canister filter. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you learned something. I didn't cover in the air-driven filter section matte filters. If you really want me to do a video on matte filters, let me know in the comments down below. I'll do a special one for matte because they are a little special compared to air-driven filter. And there's kind of really only like 2 setups. I'm sure somebody's going to be like, no, there's way more than that. But yeah, there's really only 2. But if you want that, let me know. I'll be happy to do a video on that. If you learned something interesting and you don't necessarily care about matte filters, let me know that down in the comments below. You feel there's something I obviously missed. I'm a complete internet dum-dum. Put that in the comments too. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like. And if you enjoy tips, tricks, things like that, all the way through product reviews and a number of other crazy things in the aquatic world, consider subscribing. It really helps the channel out. It's the best way to support your favorite YouTube personalities here in the fish world. As always, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome.